Hello everyone and welcome to Art Studio. If you are new to the channel, welcome, and if you are a returner, welcome back. This channel delves into the obscure, strange, and fascinating histories of the Warhammer universe. We strive to uncover and explore rarely discussed and little known histories. This channel also showcases art and miniatures. I try to update weekly and bi-weekly. Hope you enjoy the videos and please subscribe. From the most meager and inconspicuous of origins, the entity now dreaded as Kugoth, a bloated and bestial Great Unclean One, once existed as nothing more than an insignificant Nurgling, scurrying in servitude to Grandfather Nurgle. For most purposes, the assessment of Kugoth will be encompassing the Warhammer 40k universe, not fantasy. Cradled upon the vast and decaying form of the Plague God himself, Kugoth, nestled in a place of privilege as his master toiled over the creation of a virulent concoction, an unparalleled distillation of corruption and disease. However, fate proved both inconspicuous and transformative. In a moment of misstep, the diminutive imp of a Nurgling tumbled from his perch and plummeted into cauldron's festering depths. Immersed within the bubbling filth of Pestial incarnate, Kugoth instinctively drank the loathsome mixture, his feeble frame racked by the surging potency of Nurgle's dreaded elixir. A metamorphosis unlike any other unfolded into grotesque majesty. His tiny body grotesquely extended and gorged with the virulent saturation of this very essence. He did not cease his gluttonous indulgence until the cauldron lay barren, its foul reservoirs emptied into his insatiable maw. The wretched Nurgling that had once clung to his patron's shoulder was no more. In its place stood a behemoth of pestilence, a lumbering and corpulent embodiment of plague and decay. A newly ascended Great Unclean One, forever marked by the blasphemous alchemy of his creation. With a rumbling mirth that shook the festering depths of his domain, Nurgle beheld his newly transformed creation with unrestrained delight. The corpulent Kugoth, now a grotesque embodiment of disease in its most perfect form, was met not with reprimand, but with indulgent amusement of his creator, the great Nurgle. Yet, in that moment of jubilant approval, a chilling revelation took root within Kugoth's festering mind. His accidental transformation had deprived the Plague Lord of his magnum opus. The unparalleled concoction, the most sublime sickness ever wrought by the god of decay, had been squandered, consumed entirely in the gluttonous ascension of one who should have been but a lonely minion. From that day forth, Kugoth had been consumed by a singular purpose: to reclaim what was lost, to reconstruct the sublime affliction that birthed him into this bloated majesty. Unlike his fellow Great Unclean Ones who reveled in mirth and debauchery of rot and ruin, Kugoth is a creation of somber obsession. He does not wallow in the gleeful disillusion of flesh, nor does he find rapture in the ceaseless spread of pestilence. Instead, he is a scholar of decay, a methodical artisan of ruin, ceaselessly traversing the tumultuous expanse of the realm of chaos and the fragile domains of the mortals. Even in pursuit of the rarest maladies, the most insidious contagions, he gathers ever-festering ingredients, ever whispers of pestilence, all in the hope that one day he may once again replicate the lost perfection of the disease that had made him. Drifting between the veils of existence upon a grotesque and undulating palanquin, Kugoth journeys through the infinite realms in relentless pursuit of the elusive alchemy that might once more birth Nurgle's greatest lost affliction. His ponderous throne is borne upon the writhing mass of countless Nurglings, their frail forms straining under his vast weight as they scramble forth in ceaseless servitude. Laden with arcane tools, bubbling alchemies, and rusted vats overflowing with noxious afflictions, the palanquin serves as both a throne and a laboratory, a mobile sanctum where Kugoth methodically refines and distills the festering secrets harvested from the sickened carcasses of worlds both mortal and chaos. Across the endless expanse of real space and the volatile churning of the warp, he gathers his putrid ingredients, ever refining his noxious art in an unholy pursuit of perfection. Theory alone does not suffice, for Kugoth is not an idle philosopher of plague. He is a pragmatist, a craftsman of contagion whose works must be tested upon the crucible of war. With the disassociation of a scholar, he unleashes his virulent plagues upon the battlefield, allowing tides of pestilence to sweep through the mortal armies in great waves of decay. He watches impassively as flesh blackens, lungs drown in their own liquefied tissues, and entire hosts crumble in ruin beneath the weight of his latest experiments. Even in the meticulous researching, Kugoth does not simply observe from afar, he participates, hurling swarms of his putrid progeny. Each nurgling that slithers from his corpulent mass is an experiment incarnate, teeming with a unique concoction of infection, a living test subject weaponized against their doom. But Kugoth's curiosity does not end when the battle's din fades. Those whose bodies prove resilient, or whose death yield promising data, are claimed as specimens. His captives are dragged back to the malodorous halls of his lair, nestled deep within the festering heart of Nurgle's expanse, where the land of the Plague Lord stretches into ruinous vastness. There, beneath a ceiling lost to choking darkness, rows upon rows of cages extend beyond the limits of sight, each a grim testament to suffering. Within them, the wretched captives, a grotesque menagerie of beings drawn from the birth of time and space, moan and shudder, their forms racked by afflictions too terrible to name. Their agony is ceaseless, for Kugoth does not grant the mercy of a swift death. They exist only as living records, trapped in a state of perpetual decay, their demise drawn out in exquisite suffering as a great unclean one studies their slow, inevitable unraveling. Kugoth stands apart from his fellow great unclean ones, not merely in stature or renown, but in his disposition. Where most of his bloated kin revel in merriment of decay, cavorting throughout the battlefields with a grotesque glee, Kugoth is a creature of somber intellect and relentless purpose. He does not delight in suffering for suffering's sake, nor does he indulge in the boisterous mirth that so often defines Nurgle's chosen. Instead, he is contemplative, methodical, and possessed of a cold scientific detachment that makes him as much a scholar as he is a demon of war. His mind is dominated by singular obsession, the pursuit of a perfect disease. Unlike others of his kind, who see pestilence as a joyful gift to be spread indiscriminately, Kugoth views his work with more precision of an artisan. Each plague a crafted experiment, each outbreak a step closer to his ultimate goal. This relentless drive gives him an air of detachment. He does not revel in the suffering of his causes, nor does he ever lament it. He merely observes, records, and refines, treating entire civilizations as a petri dish in his grand, unholy laboratory. Though solemn in nature, Kugoth is not devoid of personality. He is a creature of patience, rarely giving in to impulsive rage or reckless destruction. His vast intellect grants him a sense of superiority over mortal and demons alike. While he is not prone to arrogance in the ways of Tzeentchian scholars or schemers, he views his fellow unclean ones as little more than crude, mindless carriers of disease, unfit to grasp the intricacies of his work. He holds himself above their mindless joy, finding their ceaseless exuberance a distraction from his great undertaking. Yet despite his detachment, Kugoth is still a child of Nurgle, bound to his patron in ways both reverent and resentful. He is accurately aware that he was once the accumulation of Nurgle's greatest achievement, a toxic miracle unlike any other. Yet, in becoming what he is, he has robbed his creator of that triumph. This knowledge fuels his endless pursuit, not out of love or loyalty, but out of a need to right what he perceives as an imbalance in the warp. He seeks not to please Nurgle, but to restore what was lost, to reclaim the alchemy perfection that had once defined him. In battle, Kugoth is neither frenzied or wrathful. He is an observer, watching the effects of his plague with curiosity of that of a researcher, his mind ever calculating, adjusting, and refining. Even amidst the carnage, he maintains his composure. For every battlefield is but another experiment, ever dying screams of another data point in his endless research. Kugoth should not be seen as a monster of cruelty or malice, or a demon of ruin. He is something far worse, an intellect driven by the cold pursuit of knowledge, a being of whom suffering is not a goal but a means to an end, a grand biological tapestry, forever striving to perfect the ultimate sickness that will, at last, make him whole. Kugoth, as both a scholar of disease and a formidable warrior of Nurgle, wields an arsenal that reflects his dual nature, both the methodical experimenter and the unstoppable avatar of pestilence. His war gear is not merely weaponry, but an extension of his festering intellect, each tool designed to further his endless quest for perfected disease while reducing his enemy to decayed remnants of their former selves. The Palanquin of Nurgle. Kugoth's immense bulk is carried upon a palanquin heaped high with the grotesque trappings of his unholy craft. This mobile throne is borne upon the writhing masses of thousands of straining Nurglings, each one a miniature embodiment of disease and decay. The throne itself functions as both a war platform and a laboratory, its rusted surfaces covered with pestilence, corroded vials, and ancient cauldrons brimming with noxious concoctions. As Kugoth traverses the battlefields, the throne allows him to study his plagues in real time, observing their effects upon the battlefield with detached fascination. Nurgling bombardments. Kugoth possesses a uniquely horrifying method of ranged combat. He lobs his own spawn at the enemy. The Nurglings that gestate in his rotting form are not merely demons. They are living vessels of pestilence, each one incubating a unique strain of disease crafted by Kugoth's endless experiments. With a sluggish yet deceptively powerful hurl, Kugoth sends these creatures screaming through the air, where they burst upon impact in an explosion of filth, disease, and gnashing teeth. The unfortunate victims find themselves not only in physical force, but the virulent maladies in the Nurgle's bodies. Each bite and claw further spreads Kugoth's latest biological warfare. The pestilent retort. Among his many instruments of diseasecraft, Kugoth carries an alchemaic retort, an ancient and distended vessel brimming with the bubbling poisons, corrosive bile, and liquefied remains of failed experiments. With measured precision, he upends this infernal device, drenching foes in thick caustic slop that sears through armor and flesh alike, leaving behind nothing but slogging skin, bones blackened by supernatural decay. The mixture is ever-changing, for Kugoth is a scientist first and foremost. Each battle is an opportunity to refine his work. The content of the retort shifts to incorporate new and ever more lethal variations of disease. The Cauldron of Pox. While Kugoth does not physically carry the rusted cauldron that birthed his current form, he is nonetheless bound to its legacy. Some believe he has replicated a smaller, portable version of this original vessel, one from which he brews and refines his most insidious infections. Others claim that his own bloated form has become a living cauldron, his very essence a seething reservoir of pestilence from which all creatures are born. Regardless, this ever-churning reservoir of disease ensures that Kugoth's arsenal never runs dry. His ability to concoct new plagues is limitless, and his enemies will always find themselves facing some new, nightmarish affliction. The Aura of Virulence. Though not a weapon in a traditional sense, Kugoth's mere presence is an assault upon the living. The air around him is thick with the miasma of decay, a cloud of spores, filth, and malignant rot that seeps into the lungs of the unprotected. Flesh blackens, wounds fester, and even the sturdiest warriors find themselves overcome with debilitating sickness merely by standing too close. This vile aura is not merely a passive side effect of his corruption, it is a calculated aspect of his warcraft, a continuous field test of the very plague that seeks to perfect. The Scholar's Mind. Though not tangible war gear, Kugoth's greatest weapon is his intellect. Unlike many of his demonic kin, who rely on brute force and sheer malice, Kugoth approaches warfare with the patience of a researcher and the methodical nature of a scientist. Every battle is an experiment. Every enemy is a test subject. He does not fight with reckless abandonment, but with cold calculation, ensuring that his plagues are delivered with precision. His knowledge of disease is unparalleled, allowing him to exploit weakness in both mortal and demonic psychology, crafting afflictions tailored to each foe he encounters. Kugoth manifests as an immense corpulent colossus of rotting flesh and oozing malignance, a grotesque amalgamation of bloated excess and calculated purpose. His form is not merely a mass of festering decay, but a living laboratory of disease. His putrid body teeming with crawling nurglings and seething with contagion. Unlike other great unclean ones, who often take on a jovial demeanor of Nurgle's indulgent affection, Kugoth carries himself as a more measured presence, his bearing marked less by mindless mirth and more by grim, solemn artisan, forever lost in his craft. Whereas brethren exude a chaotic exuberance, reveling in the festering misery they spread, Kugoth is a figure of careful deliberation. His flesh is riddled with pustules and necrotic lesions, but rather than appearing merely as a result of mindless decay, these afflictions seem almost cultivated, each ulcer and gangrenous wound a testament to his tireless experimentation. His vast belly distends unnaturally, for it is not simply a swollen mass of blight, but a womb of pestilence, a spawning ground from which his unique nurglings are created, each one a carefully crafted vector of some new disease. Unlike the more physically aggressive or even gleefully destructive greater demons of Nurgle, Kugoth does not charge into battle with reckless abandon. Instead, he looms with deliberate menace, seated upon his grand and putrefying throne, a throne of writhing, suffering nurglings who bear his massive weight upon their fragile bodies. This grotesque entourage, unlike many of his kind, served both as a means of mobility and a traveling alchemy workshop, laden with these rusted implements and pestilence-laden paraphernalia. This ensures that Kugoth is never without a means to refine his terrible work. His face, though monstrous and cavernous, like all of his kind, lacks the unrestrained mirth so common among great unclean ones. His yellow, weeping eyes gleam with an intellect rather than an unchecked glee. His leering maw curling not in joyous laughter but in quiet satisfaction of a scholar who has uncovered some dark revelation. His presence, while still laden with the choking miasma of death and filth, carries with it an air of morbid curiosity rather than sheer, chaotic indulgence. To stand before him is not only to be crushed beneath the weight of disease, but to become subject of his endless study, a living specimen in an experiment whose purpose is known only to him. In comparison to other great and clean ones, who act as disease-ridden warlords or plague-bringing heralds of their god's generosity, Kugoth is something altogether different. He is not merely a vector of corruption, but its most dedicated craftsman. His intellect and meticulous nature set him apart, his pursuit of the perfect affliction elevating him above his brethren's crude delights. When others seek to spread Nurgle's gifts with gleeful abandon, Kugoth administers them with precision, measuring their effects with cold fascination. He is not simply a demon of decay, he is an architect, an anarchist, and his most dedicated scholar. Kugoth's entrances into real space have been marked by widespread devastation and relentless experimentation, each incursion an attempt to refine his mastery over disease. From the Geistos cataclysm, where he transformed an entire agri-world into a wasteland of plague and undeath, to the Kerwin incursion when he met his match against the Grey Knights in a gruesome duel that saw him obliterated from within, Kugoth's efforts have left indelible scars upon the Imperium. His presence in the Sanctus Reach incursion further demonstrated his ambition, as he sought to propagate the warp-derived plague Bone Rack, only to once again be thwarted by the unyielding might of the Emperor's demon hunters. Yet his most audacious endeavor came upon the Plague Wars, where he marched alongside Mortarion to lay waste to Ultramar, crafting the God Blight, a disease potent enough to slay even a Primarch. However, his arrogance led him to defy Nurgle's will, culminating in his crushing defeat upon Lax, at the hands of mortal warriors, a humiliation that saw him stripped of his favor and cast back into the warp in utter disgrace. Though banished, Kugoth remains a patient and methodical force of ruin. and his exile is but a temporary delay in his ceaseless quest. His failures, though costly, have never deterred his resolve, for the nature of disease is one of persistence, of inevitable return. The great unclean one who once stood as Nurgle's most exalted alchemist now lingers in the realm of chaos, nursing his wounded pride, refining his afflictions, and awaiting a moment when the veil between the worlds thins once more. For the Imperium, his absence offers no comfort, only a temporary reprieve. For the Plaguefather will rise again, and when he does, his pestilent genius will be more refined, his maladies more insidious, and his vengeance more ruinous than ever before.
Thank you, and may the Emperor's light guide our every step, ensuring victory against the darkness that threatens humanity's future.